In broad daylight, a thief thought he had total control when he hijacked a bus full of passengers. What he never imagined was that Steven Seagal was sitting in the last row. In a matter of minutes, the fear shifted. The criminal went from issuing orders to begging for mercy. It's discovering too late that not all passengers are defenseless and that some should never be provoked. The midday sun beat down with an uncomfortable force on the city. Reflecting off the windows of the buildings and the puddles left by the morning's light rain, it was the kind of weather that made people quicken their pace, seek shade, or take refuge inside the first bus they could find. At the main station, the line for the 47B city bus moved slowly, made up of tired workers, distracted students, elderly people with shopping bags, and a few children returning from school with their backpacks slung over their shoulders. The bus driver, Don Ramiro, a robust man with a round belly and a thick mustache, glanced down at the line in the rearview mirror. He had driven the same route for years. For him, each day was the same as the last, with a million little things that never changed. The sound of the engine starting, the sudden screeching of traffic, the passengers boarding without greeting each other, the street vendors shouting out their wares before getting off at the next traffic light. It was a repetitive but peaceful life. When he opened the doors and people began to board, Ramiro had no idea that something different was about to happen. The passengers settled in, as usual, some looking out the window, others checking their phones, others falling asleep almost immediately. 2 children were arguing over who had gotten the window seat first. A woman laden with bags sighed because no one was giving up their seat. Among this everyday crowd, a man boarded who didn't attract any attention. He wore a black cap, a simple sweatshirt, and a backpack that seemed heavier than usual. He walked with tense steps, glancing around quickly, as if he feared something. But no one noticed him. He was just another passenger amidst the urban chaos. The man made his way to the back of the bus, though not quite to the very end. Stopping 3 rows from the end, and sitting on the edge of the aisle, he looked at his watch, then at the door, then at the other passengers, breathing through his mouth. His lips were dry, his hands restless. His eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and despair. His name was Tamayo, though no one on the bus would know that name until much later. To everyone, he was simply the thief. What none of the passengers knew was that the large backpack he carried didn't contain books, food, or clothes. It contained an old, rusty, dusty gun. A gun he didn't know how to use properly, but one he was prepared to fire if necessary. Not because he was a professional killer, because he was a man on the verge of collapse, and a cornered man can be just as dangerous as a cruel one. The bus lurched forward, and everyone gripped the handrails or seat backs. The windows rattled with speed, and the noise of traffic filled every corner of the vehicle. In the very last seat, at the very back, sat a large, silent, almost motionless man. He wore dark glasses, a simple suit, and had the calm air of someone accustomed to the noise of the world. His arms were crossed, his back straight, and his head tilted slightly to one side, as if he had been sleeping or simply observing. That man was Steven Seagal, but no one recognized him, and that was exactly what he wanted. Seagal didn't travel by bus every day, but he did so when he wanted to go unnoticed, when he needed time to himself, or when, like that day, I had just finished training and preferred to avoid public attention. His white martial arts uniform was hidden under a dark jacket, folded just enough not to draw attention. His calm demeanor made anyone think he was just another passenger. Perhaps a tired professor, perhaps a leisurely tourist. As the bus moved forward, Seagal kept his eyes closed, though he wasn't really asleep. His breathing was deep and steady. His ears picked up every conversation, every whisper, every sound of the engine. It was a survival habit acquired over years of training, missions, conflicts, and dangerous situations. Listening was his way of always being ready. The bus continued its route, crossing main avenues, dodging street vendors, walking between cars, passing through endless traffic lights. The journey so far had been completely normal. But Tamayo wasn't there for a normal day. While everyone else went about their routine, he unconsciously moved his fingers along the zipper of his backpack. He could feel the cold metal of the gun inside. Every now and then, he glanced ahead, watching the driver, calculating the distance, imagining the moment. He had planned the heist for 2 days, but his plan wasn't perfect. It depended on the passenger's fear. It depended on no one resisting. It depended on luck being on his side. He took several breaths. His chest ached, his throat closed up. He knew there was no turning back. He was too far in. People remained calm. No one suspected a thing. A woman slept. Another checked his laptop. A teenager listened to music so loud that notes escaped through his headphones. A father hugged his young daughter who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. And in the back, always in the back, Seagal remained silent. The bus turned a corner and got stuck in a small traffic jam. Horns blared everywhere. People crossed the street, the heavy traffic, the noise, the typical urban chaos. And there at that precise moment, when the bus was completely surrounded by cars, when people were distracted, when the driver was looking in his rearview mirrors, Tamayo made his decision. He opened his backpack and his hand touched the gun. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe below. Also, turn on notifications and tell us where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. Tamayo held the gun with both hands, his fingers trembling slightly. He wasn't a professional, but desperation gave him a clumsy courage. He stood up abruptly, making several passengers turn their heads. His ragged breathing filled the sudden silence. The sound of the backpack's zipper opening completely sounded like thunder inside the bus. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking mid-word. Several people gasped. The woman with the bags almost dropped them. The father hugged his daughter tighter. The teenager with the loud music slowly took out one earbud, not fully understanding what was happening. Don Ramiro, the driver, glanced in the rearview mirror and nearly choked on his sip of coffee. Tamayo raised his weapon, pointing it first forward, then to the sides, trying to assert his authority. His breathing was so loud he could hear his own racing heart. "Nobody moves," he repeated. "I don't want any trouble. Understood?" The passengers nodded silently. No one understood why. With dark circles under his eyes and wearing a worn sweatshirt, he had chosen that bus, that day, that hour. But that was life, unpredictable and cruel at the most unexpected moments. Tamayo moved slowly down the aisle, as if each step were a balancing act between madness and regret. His eyes darted from side to side. His hands were constantly sweating. "Driver, close the doors," he ordered. Don Ramiro obeyed, trembling. "And keep going straight. Don't stop. Don't open the door." The driver swallowed and nodded. The bus lurched forward with a nervous, almost jerky motion. The engine roared as if it too were afraid. The passengers clung to the handrails and seat backs without making a sound. Tamayo took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. He had planned to demand money, phones, wallets, and then force the driver to detour to a suburban neighborhood where some acquaintances would be waiting. But now, feeling all eyes on him, the adrenaline was setting his nerves on edge. It wasn't as easy as he had imagined. Meanwhile, at the back of the bus, Seagal slowly opened his eyes. He didn't move. He didn't make any sudden movements. He just breathed. He had heard every word, every tremor in the kidnapper's voice, every sigh from the terrified passengers. His mind analyzed the situation like a chessboard. Escape routes, distances, angles, possible moves. He didn't need to see the gun. He knew exactly what kind it was just by hearing the click of the safety as it was released. But he didn't intervene. "Not yet," Tamayo continued shouting orders. His nervousness grew with each passing second. Something inside him was fighting the decision he'd made. "Get your things out," he finally said, pointing to the middle row. "Phones, wallets, everything you have, and quick." The woman with the bags was trembling so much she couldn't open her purse. The teenager handed over his cell phone without protest. A thin man tried to remain calm as he pulled his wallet from his backpack. The children started crying, which made Tamayo even more nervous. "Shut up," he yelled, raising his gun toward the little ones. Several people screamed at once. The father tried to stand up, but Tamayo immediately pointed his gun at him. "Don't move," I said. "Nobody moves." The father raised his hands, trembling. His daughter, clutched to his chest, wept silently, her eyes wide and filled with fear. That sight made several passengers feel a lump in their throats. And at the back of the bus, she exhaled slowly. Fear is contagious, she thought, but so is calm. While Tamayo continued gathering things, a teenager of about 16, sitting in the middle of the bus, tried to hide her cell phone under her leg. She thought the thief wouldn't notice, but he did. "You, the one in red, give me your phone." She lowered her head and bit her lip. She looked like she was about to cry. "I don't have one," she lied weakly. Tamayo walked quickly toward her and pointed the gun directly at her forehead. "Don't lie to me." The girl closed her eyes, breathing heavily. Her leg was visibly trembling as she reached out to give him the phone. Just before she let go, the bus hit a deep pothole and bounced violently. The jolt made her drop the phone to the floor. Tamayo jumped and instinctively squeezed the trigger, but it didn't fire. Her finger had hesitated. That moment changed the entire atmosphere of the bus. Someone in the back murmured, "Oh my God." Another passenger choked back a sob. Tamayo took a step back, breathing as if he'd just run a marathon. Guilt began to gnaw at him. His mind was fractured between despair and pure panic. And it was precisely at that moment, when the kidnapper was at his most unstable, that the driver announced in a trembling voice, "There's a police checkpoint coming." Tam's eyes widened. He looked out the window. There were 2 patrol cars parked a few meters away. They weren't there for him, but for another operation, though he didn't know that. "Go straight ahead," he shouted, pointing at Ramiro. "Go straight ahead or I'll shoot." Ramiro obeyed, but the abrupt maneuver made the bus lurch slightly. Several people screamed. A woman's backpack fell to the floor. A girl's cell phone rolled down the aisle. The chaos multiplied, but amidst the noise, the fear, and the collective trembling, one figure remained completely still. Seagal, his gaze was steady, his breathing a perfect metronome. His hands rested relaxed on his knees. No one around him knew who he really was. But his presence radiated something few human beings could project: absolute mastery of his own body and the situation. Tamayo, however, was too agitated to notice the silent predator just a few feet away. "No one look outside," he shouted, swinging the weapon as if it weighed more than before. The passengers obeyed, but Seagal did not. He watched and waited because he knew things were far from over. The bus rattled nervously as the tension grew like a rope about to snap. Tamayo continued, pointing his weapon in every direction, pacing from seat to seat, ignoring the sweat trickling down his temples. His breathing was so rapid he seemed about to lose control. "Don't even think about looking at the police," he repeated, though his voice no longer had the same force as before. The passengers looked down. At that point, no one wanted to provoke anything. The little girl clinging to her father covered her face with her hands. The teenager with headphones pressed his lips together to keep from crying. The woman with the bags murmured a trembling prayer. But in the last row, Seagal remained still, observing every tiny gesture, not only of the kidnapper, but also of the driver. The passengers, the surroundings. It was as if he could see beyond fear, as if he were analyzing the very structure of the situation. Tamayo turned to the middle of the bus and saw the cell phone lying in the aisle. He picked it up roughly and pointed it again at the girl in red. "And what about you?" he said, breathing heavily. "Are you going to keep lying to me?" She shook her head quickly, her eyes filled with tears. Her hands trembled on her legs, her skin prickling with pure terror. Tamayo was about to say something, but the bus hit another pothole and he almost lost his balance. He grabbed the handrail, but the momentary fall enraged him even more. "Driver," he yelled. "What part of drive smoothly didn't you understand?" Ramiro raised his voice from the front. "The road's bad, sir?" "I didn't." The shout landed like a slap. Ramiro pressed his lips together, knowing that any more words could be a spark in a room full of gasoline. Tamayo moved back to the front, dragging the girl's cell phone in his hand. His footsteps echoed clumsily. Every now and then he stopped. He looked out the windows, muttering things under his breath, as if his own thoughts were arguing with each other. He didn't want it to come to this. Some passengers could hear him, but he was already there, and it was too late to back out. At one point, Tamayo stopped in front of a burly young man in his 30s who was sitting by the aisle. The guy wasn't moving, but he looked tense, his lips rigid. "Give me your wallet," Tamayo ordered. The man obeyed slowly, holding his gaze. There was anger in his eyes, but also fear. Tamayo took the wallet and continued walking. And that's when the unexpected happened. The bus stopped suddenly. A sharp, violent braking that threw several passengers forward. The woman's bags scattered on the floor. The little girl screamed. Someone's cell phone went flying. "What's going on?" Tamayo shouted, looking ahead. Ramiro was as white as a sheet. He had both hands on the steering wheel, but his gaze was fixed outside the windshield. "It's a traffic jam," he whispered. And it was true. A few meters ahead, two cars were stopped after a minor collision. One of the drivers was gesturing, the other checking his bumper. There was no way around them. The bus was stuck in the middle of the traffic under the midday sun. Tamayo swore. "Move along." "Can't," Ramiro said, lowering his head. "There's no way." Tamayo clenched his jaw. His breathing became louder and more ragged. He slammed his palm against a window. The glass rattled. No, this can't be happening to me," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. The chaos outside only made things worse. The noise of engines, horns, and voices heightened the tension inside the bus. Some passers-by glanced curiously at the vehicle, unaware that a hostage situation was unfolding inside. Tamayo felt his control slipping through his fingers. He raised his weapon again. "Listen to me, everyone," he said hoarsely. "If anyone tries to get out, if anyone tries to call the police, I'm going to shoot."
Ow.
The silence was absolute. And in that silence, a slight movement at the back of the bus caught the attention of one of the passengers. Seagal had shifted his position, not drastically, but enough to shift his body from a relaxed state to an alert one, like a cat waking up. No one knew who he was yet, but a couple of people looked at him curiously. There was something in his eyes, a cold, calculated gleam, unlike anything else. Tamayo, however, still didn't seem to notice him. "No one's going to ruin this," he said, pointing the tip of his gun at several passengers. "Nobody." Suddenly, a short, sharp sound broke the silence. Someone's cell phone vibrated. The owner, a skinny young man, turned pale instantly. He tried to turn it off, but his hands were shaking too much. The sound seemed to reverberate throughout the bus, as if amplified by a demon of fear. Tamayo turned toward him, his eyes wild. "What's that?" "That's my cell phone." "I'm sorry. Give it to me." The young man handed it over immediately. Tamayo took it and threw it at a window. The device shattered against the glass and fell to the floor. "I told you not to use anything." Tension was so extreme that several passengers began to sweat profusely. The air had become thick and still. Even the bus engine seemed to be holding its breath, and while everyone remained paralyzed, Seagal assessed every second. The kidnapper was entering the most dangerous phase, complete paranoia. His attention was erratic, his breathing irregular, his hands trembled more than before. The gun went up and down with the rhythm of his desperation. It wouldn't be long now, very little time. Tamayo walked back to the front of the bus. He pointed at anything that moved. He muttered things no one could understand. He struck the windshield again with the butt of the gun. There has to be a way out. There has to be one. And then, making the mistake that would seal his fate, he turned to the passengers and shouted, "If I can't get out of here, nobody gets out." The entire bus shrank in terror. Only one person didn't shrink back, Seagal. Her hands flexed slightly. Her eyes narrowed, her muscles tensed without her losing her composure, because the moment had arrived, the moment when the silent predator stops observing and acts. The air inside the bus seemed to have solidified. Each passenger held their breath, fearing that any movement, even the slightest, would trigger something irreparable. Tamayo trudged toward the back with heavy steps, as if each one were sinking him deeper into his own despair. The gun moved erratically in his hand, rising and falling with each jumbled thought that crossed his mind. The passengers remained paralyzed, but some began to cast discreet glances toward the last row. That silent man, the one in the white suit beneath the dark jacket, had shifted again. It wasn't a sudden or threatening movement, but it didn't seem accidental either. There was something about his stillness, Something about the way he observed everything without blinking that was beginning to draw more attention than the kidnapper's weapon. Tamayo hadn't noticed yet. The bus was still stuck in the traffic jam. Outside, the sun shone mercilessly, reflecting off the windshields and the zinc sheets of the nearby roofs. The heat seeped in through the windows, clinging to the skin like a damp layer. The street swarmed with noise, honking horns, and voices, as if the external chaos mirrored the internal one. Tamayo stopped in front of a teenager sitting next to his mother. The boy tried to shrink, to hide in his mother's arms. "You," Tamayo said, pointing the gun at him. "Do you have a cell phone?" The teenager shook his head, almost on the verge of tears. Tamayo didn't believe him. He grabbed the boy's backpack and emptied it into the aisle. Books, notebooks, a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil, and a pencil case spilled onto the floor. "I swear, I don't have one," the boy sobbed. Tamayo looked at him suspiciously, but found nothing. He grunted and continued walking toward the back of the bus. His breathing had become a nervous panting, as if each breath were a fight against himself. The gun was now pointed toward the row where several passengers were gathering. They tried to press their backs to the seats as if that would make them invisible. Then Tamayo reached the second-to-last row. There, two grown men shrank in their seats. One of them raised his hands, visibly trembling. "I have nothing, please." Tamayo ignored him. There, just a couple of steps further, was the last row. And in the last row, Seagal. Tamayo looked up and saw him for the first time with true clarity. The calm-eyed stranger, sitting with a posture too steady to be that of someone frightened. The dark glasses, the serene expression, but above all, the way his body seemed poised, as if it didn't belong to the prevailing chaos. Tamayo frowned. "And what about you?" he asked, slowly approaching. Seagal didn't answer. Tamayo raised the gun toward him. "I'm talking to you. Do you have a phone? Do you have anything? What are you hiding back there?" The passengers watched the scene with a mixture of terror and hope. Something was about to happen. The air vibrated with electricity, as if the entire universe were holding its breath. Seagal slowly raised his gaze. "I'm not hiding anything," he finally said, his voice so calm it contrasted sharply with the kidnapper's hysteria. Tamayo stopped. That wasn't the answer he'd expected. There was no trembling, no pleading, just a calmness so absolute it almost enraged him. "So why are you so calm?" Tamayo asked, taking another step closer. Seagal tilted his head slightly. It wasn't mockery, not defiance. It was simply confidence. "Because you don't have the control you think you do," he replied. The sentence landed like a hammer blow on the atmosphere. The passengers felt the change immediately. Tamayo, too. His breathing quickened. Something inside him tensed. His finger on the trigger tightened instinctively. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice trembling. Seagal didn't move. "I said you don't have control." Tamayo raised the gun even higher, pointing it at his face. "Think you're so clever? Oh, you think that because you sit at the back of the bus, you're out of my reach?" Seagal breathed deeply and slowly, as if time were his own. "I think," he said, "I should put the gun down before things get worse for you." A total silence filled the bus. Not even the cars outside seemed to make a sound. Tamayo let out a nervous laugh. "Oh yeah. And what are you going to do?" "What are you?" "Cop, soldier, detective, just someone who's not going to let you hurt anyone else," Seagal replied. The words weren't loud or aggressive, but there was an ancient weight to them. A firmness that didn't need to raise its voice. Tamayo felt something cold run down his spine. The kidnapper raised the gun with both hands, as if that gave him more control than he had. "Stand up," he ordered. Seagal didn't stand up. "I won't," Tamayo replied. He took another step, so close, he could point the gun directly at Tamaya's chest. "I told you to stand up." Tamaya's hands were trembling. His eyes were red, fueled by rage and fear. He was a cornered animal, and that made him all the more dangerous. The passengers watched the scene and wanted to scream, but fear choked their voices. The girl's father hugged her tighter. The woman with the bags covered her mouth to stifle her sobs. Everyone knew that this moment would decide their fate. Then Seagal moved only one hand, very slowly, so slowly that no one saw any threat in the gesture. It was as if he were simply adjusting his stance, but in reality, he was creating distance. Tamayo saw the movement and reacted by jumping back. "Stay still? Stay still? I told you, don't move." Seagal didn't withdraw his hand. He just kept it suspended at armrest height, without any visible tension, a gentle gesture, but his eyes were ice. "You're making it worse," he said calmly. Tamayo swallowed, standing there breathing like a cornered bull. And for the first time, he hesitated. That hesitation was the first step toward his downfall. The second moment came when the bus lurched slightly forward as the collision ahead began to clear. A vibration, an almost imperceptible shift, but enough. Tamayo lost a fraction of his balance, minuscule, brief, but in situations like this, the slightest movement can be fatal. Seagal straightened up almost instantly. A movement so subtle that most didn't see it, but the energy in the air shifted. It was as if a predator had fully opened its eyes. Tamayo didn't understand it, but he felt it and took a step back, trying to regain the advantage. But it was too late. Much too late. Seagal was ready. The collision was seconds away. The roar of the bus hurtling down the main avenue rattled the windows. The smell of gasoline mixed with road dust seeped in through the roof vents, and every bump sent the passengers bouncing, torn between fear and hope. They had seen what Steven Seagal had just done. They didn't fully understand it, but they knew that as long as he was there, the situation wasn't lost. The main thief, the same one who had shot out the rearview mirror hours earlier, jerked the steering wheel from side to side, searching for a way out, growling like a cornered animal. The veins in his neck bulged with tension, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead. He breathed rapidly, desperate. "It can't be," he yelled, pounding on the dashboard. "Who the hell is that guy?" The man with the gun, sitting next to him, trembled as he held the weapon in his sweaty hands. It was difficult for him to grip it. He glanced behind him every 5 seconds, as if afraid Steven would appear at any moment. "He's just a passenger, right?" The man mumbled, trying to convince himself, even though he knew it was a lie. The original driver, his hands tied behind the passenger seat, swallowed hard. "That man isn't just any passenger. You messed with the wrong person," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. The lead robber whirled around and slapped him just for saying it, but his hands were shaking. He was losing control. Meanwhile, in the back, Steven Seagal calmly watched the bus's every move. His eyes darted from the front to the outside and back again to the passengers, as if every second were calculated with millimeter precision. He knew the robber was panicking, and a desperate man is a loose cannon. "They're heading for the highway," murmured the woman with glasses, leaning back in the seat in front of him. "If they get there, they'll speed up even more. What do we do?" Steven placed a hand on her shoulder to calm her. "Leave it to me," he replied, his voice low. The little boy who had been silent the entire trip stared at him, his eyes wide. You can save us?" he asked timidly. Steven, though serious, softened his expression. "I'll do everything I can. Stay close to your mom, okay?" The boy nodded firmly. Then the bus swerved sharply onto a sandy detour that bordered an industrial zone. The vehicle began to lose stability due to the speed. The tires slipped on the loose dirt, and a metallic screech filled the air. The driver shouted, "They're following us." "Look," he pointed to the broken rearview mirror. A police car was coming up behind, but keeping its distance. They didn't know what was happening inside the bus or if there were any injured hostages. They were just following closely. "Step on it," the second driver ordered. But Steven's mental map was faster than they were. He knew that if the bus went deeper into that zone, they could hide among warehouses or get lost in a maze of containers. He couldn't let that happen. At that moment, Steven stood up. The passengers held their breath. "Where are you going?" an old man whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm going to finish this," he replied simply. He walked down the aisle with slow but steady steps. Every movement of his seemed calculated, efficient. His mere presence was imposing. He stopped right in the middle of the bus and assessed the distance ahead. The vehicle was shaking violently, but he stood with an almost unnatural stability. The robber saw him in the side mirror. The second robber yelled, "Here he comes again. Stop the bus. Do something." The makeshift driver jerked the steering wheel to try and shake Steven off, as if that would make him fall. The bus lurched from side to side. Several passengers screamed and clung to their seats, but Steven remained standing. He didn't even hesitate. He moved forward. The robber at the wheel, terrified, reached under the seat for a weapon, but found only a small knife. Even so, he grabbed it, ready to use it somehow. "Don't even think about coming near me," he shouted, pointing awkwardly toward the aisle. Steven kept walking. His shadow grew longer in the aisle, illuminated by sunlight streaming through the side windows. The second robber raised his weapon. The passengers held their breath, but before he could fire, Steven leaned his body just inches to one side and reached for an overhead handrail. The movement was so fluid it resembled a dance. The shot went astray, shattering a window. A gust of wind rushed into the bus. Steven used the robber's recoil to propel himself forward, advancing with surgical precision. The robber fired again, but Steven was no longer in the center of the aisle. He moved to the sides, using the seats for support, barely touching the floor, his eyes fixed on his target. The passengers gasped. The knife-wielding robber, no longer in complete control of the bus, swerved, and the vehicle tilted slightly to the right. Several people screamed. Steven launched himself forward in a movement so swift that even the robber with the gun couldn't follow him with his eyes. In a split second, Steven struck the gun, deflected it, grabbed it by the barrel, and disabled it by throwing it to the back of the bus. Then he shoved the thief against the dashboard with an arm lock that made him groan in pain. The other man tried to attack him with the knife, but Steven raised his knee, blocked the assailant's wrist, and with a twist of his wrist, cleanly disarmed him. The bus swerved, nearly running off the road. Without losing control, Steven grabbed the steering wheel, while still holding the thief down with his other arm. The passenger screamed again. "Hold on," he warned as he aligned the bus. The lead robber struggled, but Steven had him pinned down. And even while maintaining control of the vehicle, his movements were firm, precise. The other robber tried to crawl to retrieve the weapon, but a passenger, the elderly man, kicked him with surprising determination, pushing him back. Steven took a deep breath, stabilizing the bus as the wheels kicked up dust on the road. The end was near, very near, and the robbers knew it. The bus continued along the dusty road, slower now, but still moving. The engine roared with an uneven sound, as if it were about to give out after so much abuse. Steven Seagal kept one hand steady on the steering wheel, while with the other, he held the lead robber, who was panting and trying unsuccessfully to break free. His movements were clumsy, desperate, almost childlike compared to Steven's unflappable strength. The passengers could hardly believe what they were seeing. For long minutes, they had felt their lives hung by a thread. But now, as the bus stabilized and as the sunlight filled the interior with a warm glow, it seemed the nightmare was nearing its end. "Let go, let me go," the breathless thief stammered, his cheek pressed against the dashboard. "Stop fighting," Steven replied in a grave voice. "It's over." The second robber, the one who had lost his weapon moments before, was breathing heavily on the floor, clutching his shoulder, twisted from the fall. He tried to crawl, but a passenger, the young man in the red shirt, pinned him down with his foot, preventing him from moving further. The people who minutes before had been paralyzed by terror were now helping. A spark of courage ignited in each of them. The bus finally left the industrial area and slowly merged onto a paved road. In the distance, several patrol cars blocked the road, forming a barrier. Police officers in bulletproof vests ran toward the scene with their weapons drawn but without firing. They had heard the reports. They knew there were hostages. Steven loosened his grip on the main robber for a moment so he could brake. The bus squealed, shook, and came to a complete stop with a metallic groan. Everything fell silent. A silence so profound that the passenger's ragged breathing was barely audible. Steven released the lead robber, who fell to his knees, his face drenched in sweat. At that moment, the second robber tried to get up and run toward the back door, but Steven stopped him with a single sentence. "Don't." The man froze. "I don't need any more." The police began surrounding the bus, banging on the doors and shouting instructions. The original driver, still with his hands tied, raised his voice. "It's okay. We're okay. You can open up now." An officer carefully opened the door, pointing inside. Steven raised his hands just enough to make it clear he wasn't a threat. The passengers all spoke at once. "That man saved us. He caught the robbers. He's a hero." But Steven just walked calmly toward the exit, as if nothing that had happened was extraordinary. The robbers were handcuffed amidst a struggle. The lead robber kept repeating, "I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who he was. He didn't know." The police officers shoved him into the patrol car without much patience. In contrast, when they looked at Steven, it took them a couple of seconds to process what they saw. "Sir, you," said the officer who had opened the door. "I was just passing by," he replied with a slight bow. The passengers began to get off, and several approached to thank him. The mother of the boy who had been sitting near Steven briefly hugged his arm, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she sobbed. "Make sure you get home calmly," he replied, looking at the boy. "And listen to him when he says something doesn't feel right. He has good intuition." The boy smiled shyly. "Do you really think so?" "Of course," Steven replied, patting the boy's head. "And keep taking care of your mom. You're doing a great job." The paramedic wanted to check on him, but Steven held up a hand. "I'm fine." The passengers dispersed, some talking to police officers. Others were discussing what had happened, trying to piece together the events. The officer approached again. "Mr. Seagal, if it's not too much trouble, could you give us your statement?" "Even if it's brief, I have no problem with that," he replied. As they spoke, a police helicopter circled overhead, stirring up dust from the road. The sun was still high in the sky, bright, as if to emphasize that all of this had happened in broad daylight. No shadows, no hiding. Steven finished his statement a few minutes later. The officer took notes on every word, aware that she was dealing with someone very different from any other passenger on public transport. "Thank you very much, Mr. Seagal. What you did today saved many lives." Steven said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words. The original driver, now free of his restraints, limped toward him. "Listen, if I hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. I owe my life to you and to everyone here as well." Steven looked at him for a second, as if deeply considering something, and finally replied, "You don't owe me anything. Just make a decision. Don't let fear control your life again." The driver swallowed, unsure what to say. Steven then walked to the back of the bus, where his belongings remained undisturbed even after the chaos. He picked up his small backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away. Police officers, passengers, and onlookers watched him walk off down the road unhurriedly, without a trace of fatigue, without expecting recognition. Just another day. Another incident resolved. Another life moving on. The wind stirred up some of the dust from the road surrounding him, and for a moment, it seemed as if Steven Seagal vanished into the clarity of the day, as if he had been there only to restore balance and then continue on his way. The boy's mother murmured, "It's like it's not real." And the driver replied, "Yes, it was real. It's just that some people are different." The boy, on the other hand, had no doubts. He looked toward where Steven had disappeared and said confidently, "He's going to help someone else." No one could contradict him. The bus's engine fell silent as the sun continued to beat down on the scene. It was over, but something else had also begun. Because where others saw simply a heroic act, Steven Seagal saw only the responsibility to intervene when no one else could. And so another story was born. Steven finished giving his statement a few minutes later. The officer took notes on every word, aware that she was dealing with someone very different from any other passenger on public transport. "Thank you so much, Mr. Seagal. What you did today saved many lives." Stefan said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words. The original driver, now free of his restraints, limped toward him. "Listen, if I hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. I owe my life to you and to everyone here as well." Steven looked at him for a second, as if deeply considering something, and finally replied, "You don't owe me anything. Just make a decision. Don't let fear control your life again." The driver swallowed, unsure what to say. Steven then went to the back of the bus where his belongings were still untouched even after the chaos. He picked up his small backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away. The police officers, the passengers, and the onlookers watched him walk away along the road unhurriedly, without a trace of fatigue, without expecting recognition. Just another day. Another incident resolved. Another life went on. The wind stirred up some of the dust from the road surrounding him, and for a moment it seemed as if Steven Seagal vanished into the daylight, as if he had been there only to restore balance and then continue on his way. The boy's mother murmured, "It's like it wasn't real." The driver replied, "Yes, it was real. It's just that some people are different." The boy, on the other hand, had no doubts. He looked toward where Steven had disappeared and said confidently, "He's going to help someone else." No one could contradict him. The bus's engine fell silent as the sun continued to beat down on the scene. It was over, but something else had also begun. Because where others saw simply a heroic act, Steven Seagal saw only the responsibility to intervene when no one else could. And so another story was born. Steven finished giving his statement a few minutes later. The officer took notes on every word, aware that she was dealing with someone very different from any other passenger on public transport. "Thank you so much, Mr. Seagal. What you did today saved many lives." Stefan said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words. The original driver, now free of his restraints, limped toward him. "Listen, if I hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. I owe my life to you and to everyone here as well." Steven looked at him for a second, as if deeply considering something, and finally replied, "You don't owe me anything. Just make a decision. Don't let fear control your life again." The driver swallowed, unsure what to say. Steven then went to the back of the bus where his belongings were still untouched even after the chaos. He picked up his small backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away. The police officers, the passengers, and the onlookers watched him walk away along the road unhurriedly, without a trace of fatigue, without expecting recognition. Just another day. Another incident resolved. Another life went on. The wind stirred up some of the dust from the road surrounding him, and for a moment it seemed as if Steven Seagal vanished into the daylight, as if he had been there only to restore balance and then continue on his way. The boy's mother murmured, "It's like it wasn't real." The driver replied, "Yes, it was real. It's just that some people are different." The boy, on the other hand, had no doubts. He looked toward where Steven had disappeared and said confidently, "He's going to help someone else." No one could contradict him. The bus's engine fell silent as the sun continued to beat down on the scene. It was over, but something else had also begun. Because where others saw simply a heroic act, Steven Seagal saw only the responsibility to intervene when no one else could. And so another story was born. The passengers and onlookers watched him walk away along the road unhurriedly, without a trace of fatigue, without expecting recognition. Just another day. Another incident resolved. Another life moving on. The wind stirred up some of the dust from the road surrounding him, and for a moment it seemed as if Steven Seagal vanished into the clarity of the day, as if he had been there only to restore balance and then continue on his way. The boy's mother murmured, "It's like it wasn't real." The driver replied, "Yes, it was real. It's just that some people are different." The boy, on the other hand, had no doubts. He looked toward where Steven had disappeared and said confidently, "He's going to help someone else." No one could contradict him. The bus's engine fell silent as the sun continued to beat down on the scene. It was over, but something else had also begun. Because where others saw simply a heroic act, Steven Seagal saw only the responsibility to intervene when no one else could. And so another story was born. The passengers and onlookers watched him walk away along the road unhurriedly, without a trace of fatigue, without expecting recognition. Just another day. Another incident resolved. Another life moving on. The wind stirred up some of the dust from the road surrounding him, and for a moment it seemed as if Steven Seagal vanished into the clarity of the day, as if he had been there only to restore balance and then continue on his way. The boy's mother murmured, "It's like it wasn't real." The driver replied, "Yes, it was real. It's just that some people are different. The boy, on the other hand, had no doubts. He looked toward where Steven had disappeared and said confidently, "He's going to help someone else." No one could contradict him. The bus's engine fell silent as the sun continued to beat down on the scene. It was over, but something else had also begun. Because where others saw simply a heroic act, Steven Seagal saw only the responsibility to intervene when no one else could. And so another story was born.